Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be with you. We are starting our second session about the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. And it's important to deal with the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ in a way where we are not only dealing with facts and dates and trying to know what happened in his life, but to do what we have to do, which is to extract and to draw from his life lessons and teachings for our own life in our contemporary reality. So this is what we are going to do while studying his life and studying some of the events and the important situations or realities he had to deal with. And this is the meaning of the Quran when we read the Quran and it is said, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. There is the best model for you in the messenger, peace be upon him. It means as a model, he is the one who is sending you teachings and lessons, not only through the revelation, not only through the ahadith, but also through his own life. And that's something which is important. When we deal with his life, we need to remember that there are three main sources that we have to keep in mind. The first source, of course, is what we find in the Quran. And the Quran is talking in a way about the Prophet's life, ﷺ. The ahadith, the prophetic traditions, are also telling us something about his life. And there are other sources like Ibn Ishaq, Ibn Hisham, who in fact were writing about his biography. And when we are going through all these sources and resources, we get a sense of what happened during his life. So let us start by saying that he was born in Mecca, and in Mecca at that time the great majority of the people were polytheists, worshipping idols. And there were a few people worshipping only one God. And coming back to the Abrahamic tradition we were talking about in the first session, Abraham, peace be upon him, was a monotheist. And the word for this in the Quran is Hanif, Hunafa. These people were Hunafa. And what we find in the Quran is a verse telling us about this reality. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ دِينًا مِمَّنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ وَاتَّبَعَ مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا. اتبع مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا means following the religion of Abraham, Hanifa, who was worshipping only one God. And the people who are following are the better in religion. And this is said in the verse, adding to the fact that they were following Abraham, and وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ, doing good deeds. That's also the two conditions, one God and a specific behavior, which is in fact to spread the good and to do what is good in their life. So these were the people who were in fact isolating themselves in Mecca and worshipping one God and following Millata Ibrahim, so the religion and the tradition of Abraham, peace be upon him. So that's important. Why? Because many of these people, when the Prophet ﷺ came with his message, acknowledged, recognized what he was saying, because they were already dealing with it. There were only a few Christians and Jews in the region, and there were one who was so important, and we'll talk about him later, is Waraqa ibn Nawfal. Waraqa ibn Nawfal is the cousin of Khadija, the first wife of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And he converted to Christianity, and he is the first who acknowledged the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was the last messenger, was a messenger. That also it's important. So this is the environment, and what we find in Ibn Hisham and talking about Ibn Ishaq is that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was born on Monday, Rabi' al-Awwal, the 12th day of Rabi' al-Awwal, and this was in the year of the elephant. In fact, for us it's 570. This is where he was born according to the tradition. And he was born in Mecca, and his mother Amina was in fact on her own, because when she was 2 months pregnant, the Prophet ﷺ lost his father. So he was born fatherless. And that's important because he's coming from a very noble tribe, the Banu Hashim. But at the same time, his status as being fatherless make him in a way in a very precarious situation. So he was from a noble tribe in a very, very vulnerable social status. And this will have an impact on what will happen in his life later. Let us add here that his mother, while she was pregnant, got some signs that something important was happening to her. She even had a dream where she was told that this child will be Sayyid Hadihil Ummah, meaning the master of this community. So, in fact, at that time, it was customary to entrust infants to wed nurses and to tribes that were in the nearby desert. And this is what happened. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was not already a prophet, but the Muhammad was given to Halima. And Halima was living in the desert. And here there is something which is very important, because in this desert, this is where he was, in fact, educated. And the desert has a very important impact on the Prophet ﷺ. And we need to get this right from the very beginning. The desert is the infinity of space connected with the finitude of the cycle of time. It's the cycle dimension of time. And this is where you feel in the desert that you are vulnerable, that you are very fragile, that you have to rely on the power of nature, and meaning here that this will bring you to the power of God. So nature has a very important role, and the desert is where you really feel vulnerable. You really feel in this barren environment. You have to deal with your own fragility. Desert, it's important. But it's also important to remember that he was dealing with poverty, because Halima was the last one to arrive in Mecca, and all the other children were taken by the rich people, from the rich people, because they were sure that they will get the money. But with a child who is fatherless, in a very, as I said, precarious status, they were not willing to take him. So at the end, Halima took him because he was the last one left there. So she took him and she brought him to her tribe. And it was in this situation, in a very poor environment in the desert, that he grew up. Let us add something that we find in the Quran, that in fact this situation will be reminded to the Prophet ﷺ later in the Quran, when we have in the Quran أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. Did he not find you orphan and he gave you a refuge? Did he not find you wandering and he guided you? Meaning that you were poor, you were orphan, you were lost, and God came to you and helped you at that time. The Quran is talking about this situation to remind the Prophet, peace be upon him, of the grace of God, the bounty of God, the generosity of God. But more importantly, it is said just after this, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ. Then, because you were in this situation, don't reject the orphan. What does it mean for us? It means that the Prophet ﷺ, before he became the messenger, the last messenger ﷺ, experienced poverty, experienced vulnerability and fragility in the desert. And God is telling you, take your past, and because of your past, know how you have to deal with the poor people today. That's an essential teaching for us, because at the end of the day, as much as the environment is a book and a school. Your own past is a school. You are not Muslim at that time, but what you experience should help you today to help the poor and not to reject them. So there is something which it's important for us and for the people among us who converted to Islam, people who had a very bad past or did so bad things in the past. Don't reject your past as something that you have to cut from yourself. No, look at it as a school from which and through which you are building your own personality. So don't forget your past, but use it as a school. That's something which is important. Where do you come from? It's part of how you are building your personality, and this is what happened to the Prophet ﷺ. So we need to get it right as well. So the environment, it's important, and today for us, through our spiritual journey, in our cities and our towns, the buildings around us, we don't look at the space, we don't look at the environment, we don't look at nature. While this was so important for the Prophet ﷺ, the sense of fragility, as I said, the sense of vulnerability, the sense that you have to rely on water, you have to rely on food, you have to rely to look at the elements to understand that later, when the Quran came to the Prophet and he cried, the Quran was talking about the environment. إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب. In the creation of heavens and earth, alternation of night and day, there are signs for those who are full of insight. It means here that and when Bilal came to call for the prayer in the morning, he saw the Prophet ﷺ crying. He said, "Why are you crying? What's the matter?" And he said, "I just got this revelation." The verse was talking about the creation of heavens and earth. And woe to the one who is listening to hear this verse and don't meditate over it. This is what the Prophet was telling us, meaning that from the very beginning, this life, this childhood in the desert with Halima was important. And then when he was 4, something happened with his family, with the son of Halima. The son of Halima came to Halima and said, look, 2 men came and opened the chest of Muhammad and took something out of it. And she was scared. She came to Muhammad and he confirmed as a child, yes, something happened to me. And she was scared, say, okay, we can't keep it with us because maybe his mother is going to be upset with us. We are going to bring him back to Mecca. And this is what she did. Knowing that something was happening around him, that she also saw signs, and she brought him back to Halima. He was 4. So he went back to Mecca and stayed there for 2 years with his mother. And then his mother wanted to bring him to Yathrib. Yathrib is the old name of Medina, for him to meet with his bigger family. And on her way to Yathrib, she also passed away. And he was 6 and he was fatherless and motherless, completely orphaned. Baraka, the servant, brought him back to Mecca and he was looked after his grandfather, Abd al-Muttalib. And he stayed with Abd al-Muttalib for 2 years. For 2 years under his authority, because he had authority. He was from a noble tribe and he was looked after in a way where he has an important self-respect and he was protected. So you need to get this right in his personality. In the desert, poor, coming from a noble tribe, at the same time very, very fragile as to the social status and as to the reality he had to face in his society. 2 years later, he lost his grandfather, Abd al-Muttalib. And before he left, Abd al-Muttalib asked his own son, Ali, Abu Talib, to look after his, in fact, nephew, because he was the son of his brother. And he looked after him, Abu Talib, and his wife Fatima. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, later said, they looked after me as if they were my father and my mother. And he had a story with him. We will come to this in following sessions here. But it's important to get a sense, okay, in the desert, losing his father, and then his mother, and then his grandfather, and then he was with his uncle. So the reality of death, the reality of finitude, the reality of limitation was there from the very beginning. And bringing him back to the reality of life and the very meaning of life, that's also important. In this context, and God, Allah is talking about it for us to understand that there are signs in his life and there were signs around him, and something that the desert is bringing to the people every day, every year, just to remind them of the very essence of life. What we find in the Quran is also something bringing us to this. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنَّكَ تَرَى الْأَرْضَ خَاشِعَةً فَإِذَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْهَا الْمَاءَ اهْتَزَّتْ وَرَبَتْ. And among his signs, there is this land which is still, and if we send onto it water, you see it stir and grow, meaning that this is exactly what will happen with life. So the land around you is talking, is telling you about your own life, and this is exactly what in the verse اهتزت وربت إن الذي أحياها لمحيي الموتى. The one who brought this, who revived this land, is the one who will bring you back to life after your death. In fact, there is a communication, there are signs. And we need to get this right. Before the revelation was coming to the Prophet ﷺ, the environment, the desert, the people around him were sending signs which were already a book to read, a reality to understand, a revelation to get. And this is what the revelation will tell us later about his own life. In the revelation, there are signs about and meanings and teachings about what happened before for him to ponder. Meaning, once again, you were not the messenger before you were 40, but everything which happened before you were 40 were in fact signs for you to understand, to get teachings to help you to understand. It was an indication. Ar-Rabb, we translate Ar-Rabb by the Lord, is also Ar-Rabb min tarbiyya, mean the relationship with the educator. He was educated by God, and he was in fact looked after step by step in this situation. Later, so he was 8 when he was with Abu Talib, and he was now looked after, and he started to be a shepherd. In fact, to earn his living. This is how it started for him. He was very young, and he said to the people around him and all the companions. Later, he would say, "There is no messenger who came who was not a shepherd in his early years or during his life." And they asked him, "Even yourself?" He said, "Yes, even myself." And there is here something once again which is important. A shepherd has or need at least 3 qualities. The first one is a sense of solitude, to deal with his own solitude, because he is alone with the animals, and he is alone trying to deal with the reality. He is in this reality as well trying to guide the animals he's looking after. And then the third thing which is important is this sense of watchfulness, which is just to be very aware of what is happening around him. So these are elements and that we can get out of the first part, his birth and the first years of his childhood. we'll carry on the story and try to get some teachings out of it. But the starting of his life, it's essential for us to get a deep meaning of the reality, the two books in fact. The revelation that came later was just confirming the revelation that he had around him when he was a child. Don't forget to tell the people you love that you love them. Life is fragile. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.